Where's my pen over here? All right, good morning. So we'll go ahead and get into chapter 33 or further into it as far as we can. We probably won't finish it today, but we'll get close. Next week, just to make sure everybody understands, on Monday you have your lecture exam over chapters 29 and 30. Remember, there's nothing going to be on any exams about the fungus, about chapter 31. There's not going to be anything on the lab practicals, not going to be anything on lecture exam, so don't worry about that chapter at all. I don't, if there are assignments for it, those are due, but I don't remember if I put any assignments for chapter 13, to be honest, or for chapter 31. All right, and then we start we started that. We did the worm, we do the crayfish Monday, we do the shark on Wednesday, we have lecture Tuesday through Thursday. Following Monday, which is actually part of, still part of the semester, finals don't start till Tuesday. We're going to have the lab practical that Monday on labs 5 and 7. Again, not 6. 6 is the fungus. We may or may not have lecture that day. I don't know. I may do what I usually do. I might do something where I make the practical first at 8. I'll let you guys know, and then we do lecture afterwards, but I'll see. Then finals start, so Tuesday, Tuesday we don't have lecture, and Wednesday we don't have lecture, because that's during finals week. And then Thursday is your exam over 32 through 34, so we got to get moving through these chapters. So make sure you listen to these lectures if you're not online, right? Or make sure you go through the chapters in the book as well. So, all righty. Part of it is the fact that I just love talking about the stuff, so sometimes I just find, oh man, I got to move along. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but we will get through all of this stuff. All right, so let's talk about the mollusca, right? We're moving down towards the bottom, and maybe you're looking and thinking, well, gosh, aren't we about done with the invertebrates? And yeah, we are in terms of looking at them, individually as groups. But when we get to the arthropods, we're going to discover that there is a boatload of arthropods. All right, so mollusks. Mollusks are really the only ones that kind of play second fiddle to the arthropods in terms of diversity. I can't remember the number in the arthropods, how many different species there are, but a mollusk, there's over 100,000. And a lot of them are ocean species, right? Snails. I'm sorry, I said the first one that usually lives on land. Snails, slugs. See the pictures on the right? The thing in the middle is a banana slug. Slugs are kind of like basically snails that have evolutionarily lost their shells. Of course, the clams and the octopus, what we call shellfish, and then the octopi, the squid. That beautiful one in the picture is that Australian, what is it, the blue-ringed or purple? No, it's blue-ringed, I think. The venom on them is toxic. It can actually kill you. So, again, Australia has all these wonderful animals. Then there's the chambered nautilus, the picture in the lower right. That's another example of a mollusk. That's a very bizarre one with one of those very primitive eyes. You can see the eye there. That's one of those pinhole eyes that we talked about back in evolution. The shellfish, as we talked about, everybody knows, of course, when you break open, shellfish, you get that shiny, what you call mother of pearl on the inside. Well, that's important because we make that's not pearl, right? That's where pearls, that's how pearls come about. We'll talk about that in a second. But, you make costume jewelry out of that. Some of them are small, some are big. That clam there, look at this guy floating over the top. See, for scale, that's a big boy, right? Those are Indo-Pacific as well. It can weigh up to, 270 kilograms, 500 pounds, something like that. I don't ever think it's been truly documented that some guy got his foot caught in there in the clam. You see that in the cartoons, he drowns. I don't know if that's ever really happened. It might have, but I'm not sure. Some of these guys have shells, some who do not. That's going to become important in later groups. But like I said, we eat a lot of them. We make jewelry out of them, even if it's the real stuff or the pretty, but not the pearl stuff. And then and of course, like all organisms, they have those that are the bad side. The zebra mussels. See, they look like zebras, don't they? That's where they get their name. How cool, right? Anyway, this is, I don't know what it was, a pump or a buoy or something. They pulled it up out of the water. And what happened, this is called fouling. You have to foul something. And what this is fouled with, it prevented it from whatever it was supposed to be doing, was all these zebra mussels. They grow on this stuff like crazy, and they grow and grow and grow. until they plug up like intakes where places take in water, say from a river. And when they grow on the bottom of ships, they slow ships down and they cost fuel and, you know, time and money. And the reason why I'm bringing these guys up is because they're actually Asian. That's where they belong, or that's where they are. That's where they exist from. They're Asian, but they're a real problem in the United States. You see the map on the right? The little red dots are where zebra mussels have spread and infested and become invasives and done bad things, like I just explained. It's an interesting story, again, when we do the sort of the detective work. If you think about what biologists, let's say up in the Great Lakes region, what they must have thought, right, when they first, how did these things get here, you know? How did Asian zebra mussels ain't got legs, right? Mussels are clams, same kind of thing. Wings, they don't swim very far. Nobody's reported big, huge herds of zebra mussels moving across the Pacific. Well, mollusks, like a lot of critters that we know about, have larvae, right? And the larvae are much smaller, and they're planktonic, and they float. So what would happen is a lot of ships that carry iron ore, you know, really heavy material, would leave the Great Lakes region where a lot of that stuff goes on, go out the St. Lawrence Seaway, that river that's, you know, kind of cut the United States and Canada, head on over to Asia, blah, 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 through the Panama Canal, right? Or maybe the other way, doesn't matter. Over there, they would unload the iron ore, and many times, if they weren't bringing back an equivalent materials that weighed the same, the ship, you don't want ships to ride high in the water, especially in the open seas. That makes them very unstable. You want them to ride low, you want them to maintain just about the right amount of, you know, high and low in the water, and you do that by adjusting the weight. It's called buoyancy, right? If you've ever done scuba diving, you know what I'm talking about, or everybody understands buoyancy. Well, what ships do if they don't have enough stuff loaded up, remember they were bringing iron over there, so that's pretty heavy, so you got to replace that. What they do is they use water. So they fill what they do is they fill their ballast tanks. Sometimes the ballast tank is the hold where they stored the stuff, like the iron ore. So they fill those with water, you know, seawater. So they're over in Asia and fill themselves with seawater. Now they come back to the Great Lakes, and of course, before they load up with iron ore, which is a lot heavier, they offload their stuff that they may have brought back. But then guess what they do? They pump out the seawater, right? So you get the connection. So if you're a scientific detective, where's the connection there? How did explain to, like, say, if you were working for the Department of State up there, and some local person were to ask you, how did the zebra mussels get here when they're from Asia? Tell them how. How would you tell them? Yep. See how that works, and especially when we live in this global economy or this global world, that's a problem. That's how invasives get moved around. So, okay, but let's go back to just talking about mollusks in general, what it is about mollusks. All mollusks, all groups, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, are they all here? Yeah, 4 groups, 4 basic groups of mollusks. All of them share those 3 things on the screen that are in red. They all have a thing called a mantle. That's a shell, or not the shell really, but the thing that makes the shell. If you've ever, and I have a picture, well, I have a picture right here. There it is. Oh shoot, they've cut it away. Actually, in this smaller picture on the right, you can see it. The little pen that I have is pointing to the mantle. That's a layer of tissue that lays over. Now it makes the shell. All right, it secretes material that forms the shell. That's if you got one. Not everybody's got a shell. All right, everybody's got a foot. Now, it's not a foot like ours, but they do use it for locomotion. In some species, they do. Like the snail in the upper right, they crawl along with it. Bivalves, a valve is the shell. So bivalves have 2 shells. They take their foot and they dig in the sand, and then they fall into the hole, and they dig a little further, and they fall in the hole. And then if you ever gone clamming, they have these 2 siphon. I'll show you in a second what those look like. 2 tubes that water goes in and out. They're filter feeders, all right? So they have a shell, right? And they have a foot. Now, if you're a land snail, if you're a land mollusk, one of the problems you got to deal with, of course, is drying out. So if you look at the picture at the bottom, the curly one, they use their foot, land snails use their foot for moving, of course. You've seen them crawl along, ain't fast. But when it gets dry, what they can do is suck their bodies up in the shell and use their foot to seal it off. They seal off this thing called an aperture, so that helps them from drying out, obviously. Right? Isn't that kind of cool? Bivalves, what they do, and we'll talk more about this later, clams, they have muscles that hold them tightly closed when the tide is gone, so they don't dry out. Now, wow, of all the mollusks, the one who did probably the most, evolutionarily speaking, would have been these things we call the cephalopods, which is always kind of cool to remember because cephala's head, and pod is foot. So these are the head-foot mollusks, and when you think of that, you go, oh, octopus, right? What we think about octopus and squid is legs, right? Now, what has happened to the foot in this group of mollusks? Well, it's become these really cool things called legs. Legs are tentacles. Arms, I guess, not legs. Well, arms, legs, I don't know. I guess when you're that kind of critter, they're the same thing. Tentacles. All right. All mollusks, we'll talk more about that later. All mollusks have a thing called a gut, a visceral mass, an internal organs. This lump of stuff that makes up the rest of their body. They do have a body cavity. They do have a true body cavity. And when you open it up, you're inclined to think, oh, there it is. The stuff between the shell, the whole stuff, that's not the body cavity. In the picture down below with the red arrows, one of them points to the heart. They have an open circulatory system, so they have one of those hearts. You can almost see it in the picture. Yeah, just above the arrow, you can see a little hole. That's where the blood goes in. But the blood that pumps out of vessels, and this is the sinus. So when you open up the shell, you're actually looking at all this stuff floating in the sinus. That's where all that blood, that hemolymph would be floating. The actual body cavity, so it's really kind of weird, is the thicker red arrow. There's a little space around the heart. There's some other small spaces around other organs, but I show you the one that's easier to see, and that's that little one right there. So that's what's left of that body cavity. So again, they are a true coelomate like all other critters. It's just that because of their lifestyle, right, they have reduced that body cavity down. In that lump of stuff, you're going to have things that take care of the basic body functions that everybody has to go through, right? If you live in the ocean, now here's the thing that we kind of recur over and over in many different groups of animals. Gills work best in water, right? And gills do not work on land. I don't know off the top of my head, but there's probably an exception somewhere. But I'm thinking that very few, if any, critters I know use gills on land to respire. It's very common in the water, but they stick together on land. That's the problem. Now, there might be some exceptions. Now, when you live in the water, you can extract gases. You can do gas exchange in your gills, but guess what else you can do? If you made your gills a little sticky, right, and we call the gills an aquatic mollusk. We have the C's are usually silent in science. You would say ctenidia. So the ctenidia, or the gills, if you're aquatic filter feeder, if you put a little mucus on there, guess what you got? You got 2 in 1. Yeah, you got win-win, right? You got oxygen and gas exchanging. That's all working cool. And at the same time, if the gills are a little sticky, not you're too sticky, but you're living in water, so you can kind of deal with a little bit of that maybe. So you can live on land, that stickiness goes, and that's why fish suffocate. That's the same thing that would happen to a clam and dry out too, of course. But the little bit of stickiness in the water is allowing you to trap food particles. So you're really really good filter feeder. That's why they like to live where they do, right? They open their shells up when the tide is out or in, right? And they filter feed. And then they close their shells. And even when the tide's out, if the tide's not all the way out, if the tide is going out, they can get down in the sand with their foot to protect themselves and then use those in and excurrent siphons to move the water around. What a neat lifestyle, huh? More on those guys later. Everybody, like I said, now the things I said before, those are the 3 big things that mollusks have. So the 3 major characteristics are a mantle, a foot, and an internal organ. These are some other characteristics. A shell, for example. Now, lots of things got shells, and mollusks are pretty well known for them. And I'm showing you some pictures of some. There's a thing called a chitin. We'll talk about those in a second that you see in the shell there. Let me sign Cooper out, because for some reason that keeps disconnecting. Now, in the ocean, one of the very common substances that many different kinds of organisms use, we're going to see it more than once, for example, is this stuff called calcium carbonate. We're going to see it later on, much later on, when we talk about the echinoderms. It's calcium and carbon and oxygen. It's supposed to be a big O. Okay, calcium carbonate. In the ocean, calcium carbonate, among many different organisms, is a very important structural, foundational molecule. What I'm trying to say is lots of things in the ocean that need to be made hard. Think about a coral reef. The hard part of the coral reef is not the animal. The animal is actually a cnidarian. Remember? The jellyfish, the soft thing, the home they build is real hard. That's why when ships run into it, they not only screw it up, but they screw up the ship. The hardness is calcium carbonate. Now, if you're making a shell and you're a mollusk, boom, this stuff is great. There's lots of it in the water, so their shells are made of that stuff. And as I've said, shells are good for, when the tide goes out, like you see the picture of the oyster bed. Remember, you would never want to walk across that barefoot, would you? That would be horrible to walk. Nobody would. You probably wouldn't even walk across it in your flip-flops. That'd do some nasty stuff on your feet. All right, but all that stuff, that sharp stuff that would slice your feet to bits, is calcium carbonate, right? Now, when you're an organism that lives in an area where the tide goes out, like that chitin thing up the top, it's kind of a weird-looking critter. It has these weird dorsal plates that we'll talk about. You can actually use your foot like a suction cup to suck yourself down on the rock and to seal the sides off, and then you can prevent yourself from drying out. Now, do you have to prevent yourself from drying out forever? No. Like in Florida, the tides go in and out twice a day. You'd only have to protect yourself during those times when the tide was out. Just that you have to make sure that you wouldn't completely dry out, whether you're that guy or the clam closing up with their shells, for the length of time until the water came back in. Now, some groups have lost their shells, okay, and for many reasons. Like, for example, when you live on land, some groups have lost their shells because they don't really use them for protection. And they're not worrying so much about the environment. They might live in moist areas, for example. The squid, the cephalopods, those guys, in many cases, they just got mean. They just got big, okay? And they have some very interesting adaptations that maybe a shell, at this point, they don't need one. I said before, the mother of pearl is how a pearl is made. If you look in the middle, I got a little graphic that'll show you. It's basically what happens is the little blue thing, which is the sand, continually it's wrapped with that mother of pearl stuff. So the only difference between that stuff on the inside of the shell, that's worth nothing really, is the thickness. If it was really thickened up, right, and surrounded and surrounded and surrounded of these layers of that mother of pearl stuff, it'd become a pearl. You can seed them, right? They can seed pearl. They put a piece of sand in there and see if it makes a pearl. Now, a radula. This is something unique among mollusks. Nobody else in the animal world has a radula. I'm going to show you a picture of the way a radula works. That's the next slide. But not all mollusks have it. But if you have it, you're a mollusk. Okay, that's what I mean by that. It's a characteristic unique only to mollusks, certain mollusks. Now, it's a good scraper. That's what it does. It scrapes. So it's for those mollusks that are herbivores many times, right? That you see them in your aquarium. They're moving along the rocks, and if you look real close, like when they look up against the glass, or if they're up against the glass, if you have one, look real close. Sometimes you can see this. It looks kind of like a scraper. They're scraping the algae up the rock. They're living up that, so they're herbivores. Now, yeah. But as everything happens, as this whole arms race, if you can develop jaws, right, or things that can inflict capture or ways to defeat defenses, you can survive. So sometimes radulas, in those that are predatory, have been turned into things that are like drills, like you see in the picture on the left. That's what we would call a borehole. Something dug a drill through, then obviously ate the critter on the inside. Conus shells. Conus shells, what they've done with their radula, they turned it into this harpoon. Look, with a little recurve. It looks like a doggone fish hook. Toxic, by the way, has a venom gland. So not only hooks you, but it probably paralyzes. I don't know what the venom is in conus shells. I think it is one that paralyzes you. And then, of course, like if you're a squid or an octopus, you got a beak. We call it a beak because it kind of looks like a bird's beak, but it's the modified radula. And some of those are toxic, like that's the blue-ringed octopus. The saliva that comes out of the beak is actually toxic. Now, okay, the bivalves that we just talked about, the snails, or I'm sorry, not that. Why do I keep saying that? The oysters, those guys, they don't have a radula at all. Remember, they're filter feeders. So if you're a filter feeder, then your feeding mechanism is to use your sticky mucousy cell or gills. All right, don't worry too much about the mechanics. Probably the best picture to look at how it's working is the bigger one in the background. But the best picture to see what the radula looks like is this one down below. That's an electron microscope picture. A radula are these keratinous teeth. Keratin is that hard stuff on your nails, right? And what it does is it's good for scraping. And so again, the little picture up above kind of shows you the muscles. It's really kind of cool the way all that. So it's not, I mean, things don't turn. If you look at now, move to the picture on the right. If you look down to the very bottom, you can see the green gunk is the algae being scraped. So it's not like a conveyor belt, right, of these little scrapers moving back. Then you'd have to have something spinning. And yeah, that's a little complex for animals to come up with. Many animals have something that spins. Or ATP synthase does, but I don't know if any body part does. But nonetheless, what happens is the way these things move is they pass that green stuff from one to the other. The end result is the food comes off the rock and goes down the esophagus, that big tube of the snail. So this is so cool. So think about that when you're looking up there at that snail on the wall. Now this is a chitin in the picture. We'll talk about chitins in a second. They do the same thing the herbivores do. They scrape. If you look again at that snail up on the wall, you probably don't have a chitin in an aquarium. Watch it. It's scraping. That's why it keeps your aquarium clean. It's scraping the algae off, right? What a cool feeding mechanism, isn't it? For a scraper. I mean, this is perfect for a scraper. Sticky gills are good if you're a filter feeder. It's so amazing to me how critters, through evolution, through chance, figure all this out. All right, how do they reproduce? They're gonorrheic again, so there's males and females, right, versus being hermaphroditic. If you're hermaphroditic, you have both sex organs. Another word for being hermaphroditic, I might have used this. We talked about plants. Yeah, monoecious. So gonorrheic would be another word for dioecious, like the cycads were. I'm trying to remember where we are in the semester. Having two sexes, right? Some are hermaphroditic, though. Some are, like, for example, oysters can change sex. A lot of times organisms that are hermaphroditic have a lot to do with their ability to move around. You know, say if you're the only male oyster in town and you die, something comes and eats you, and all the females are like, oh, man. Now, larvae drift around, but you've got a better chance of being fertilized the closer you are to a male. So I don't know how it works on oysters, but I know in grouper, for example, one male grouper fish will have a harem of females. And if he's killed, then the dominant female turns into a male. They can never go back. You can't go back the other way, but you can go female to male. I don't know about oysters, but anyway, that's going to be something important, of course, if, like I said, if it's hard for you to get around. If you're living in the water, external fertilization is, of course, the nice way, especially in the fact that the water can move your gametes around, but then you're going to have to pay the cost of making lots of them because you're basically like the moss shedding your gametes into the water. Gastropods are snails, slugs, things that live on land. Things that live on land, not always, there's many exceptions, but things that live on land very often are internal fertilizers. Your gametes are very sensitive. That's why remember the sperm has got to swim through the water and the moss. So what internal fertilizers have done have removed the perils of the environment. Let's just make our gametes meet inside so that we don't have to worry about the outside world, right? Something we see a lot in other critters, right? There are larval forms, except for the head foot ones, the squid, the octopus. They actually have direct development means a little squid or octopus. It looks like a big one, just smaller. They grow big by getting bigger. Some organisms actually modify, change. Butterflies, right? They metamorphose. And among the mollusks, there are two types of larval forms. There's one that's called the trochophore, that one in the upper right that looks like I don't know, capsule maybe, which everybody's got. Everybody. This is what we call a free swimming larval stage. Now, free living is sort of relative. They can kind of paddle around. See the cilia? They can kind of paddle around a little bit, but they're a lot more planktonic. They're floating with the tide, right? Some of them, bivalves, the clams, the oysters, the dudes with the shells, and snails that live in the ocean. There are some snails that live in the ocean. Those organisms, a conch, there we go. There's a gastropod that lives in the ocean. Those organisms have a second larva that looks kind of like an octopus. Surprisingly, octopi don't have this, but that's the veliger larvae. Now, the reason why I put annelids in red, you probably don't, I'm pretty sure, no, we haven't done them. Annelids are segmented worms, earthworms. Okay, those are leeches are also segmented worms. But the reason why I put that in red is because I want you to remember that for later. Remember how we've always talked about in terms of evolution and being related. If you're similar in terms of how you develop or what you developed from, right? If you kind of look the same or have the same stage, then there's a good chance you're related to each other at their very basic level. Segmented worms also have a trochophore larvae. This is a lot to suggest the argument that these organisms are closely related to one another, relatively speaking. All right, well, not everybody's got the veliger, though. Again, dispersal, right? Dispersal. You can swim. That's important, or you can be planktonic, swim and float. Okay, let's look at the different groups of them. This is a neat group. You'll see these down in the Keys on the rocks a lot. That's why I have that picture. This is called the chitons. And the chitons are a group of what we call molluscan. These are classes, so kingdom, phylum, class. These are true taxonomic things. Don't get these confused with when you sometimes see things called clades. Clades are not taxonomic. They may or may not be taxonomic groups. These are classes. These are official. Polyplacophora, 8 plates. You can count them right there. There's 8 plates. How do you remember these are Polyplacophora? Well, you remember they have lots of plates, and you remember the word. Poly means many, and placo means plate, and phora is to have. It's almost like a foreign language class, isn't it? That's why people who do biology and sciences, especially biology, medicine, often take Latin, because a lot of this stuff is Latin. Like, remember polymer in Bio 1, right? Same thing. These are real easy to recognize. They have this oval body, and they have that foot below, right? And that oval body allows them to and pull that foot up and create a suction, kind of like those plastic hooks that you can put on glass and bend the hook down and it creates a suction. What are those plates made of? Well, they're made of calcium carbonate. All right, now we've talked a little bit about segmenting. All right, these guys look segmented. All right, now molluscans are not segmented. Many different organisms, earthworms we mentioned, you and I, were segmented. We've talked about segmentation. Not everybody is segmented. Remember, just because you're segmented doesn't mean you're related. The fact that these guys have 8 plates, don't let that fool you. That does not mean they're segmented. Okay, the body is not segmented. These are the dorsal. These are the plates. These are the shells of this organism. Most of these are grazers, so they're going to have that radula. This is most. Maybe they're a carnivorous chitin. Most of the ones I know. They're real hard to peel off rocks, so of course they're really good for deterring predators. The gastropods, gastro means stomach, foot, and I don't know of a really good way to help you remember what the stomach part is, but they do have a stomach, but so do the other ones. But this is the biggest group, okay? They're mostly found in the ocean, all right? Like most critters, most mollusks are found in the ocean. Some are Oh, off the top of my head real quick, I'm trying to go through. I think they're all found in the, yeah, the only ones that aren't found in the ocean are going to be in this group right here, the gastropods. So this is a big group of mollusks, mostly in the ocean, but these are the only land ones. Snails and slugs. Snails and slugs are terrestrial mollusks. There are no terrestrial cephalopods, there are no terrestrial bivalves or anything like that at all. Most have a single shell to separate them from the bivalves, but the slugs, there's a nice picture if you're just waking up of a slug. There's a slug right there. That little hole is where it breathes. See the pneumostome? Stome is round, pneumo is air. Eyes at the end of the tentacles. They crawl along without shells. Oftentimes these organisms are maybe secrete a material that might dissuade predators, like a caterpillar or a butterfly might do. Some of them might be toxic. I don't know. I don't know if any. They can't bite you. They don't have a radula. We'll talk about nudibranchs in a second. Nudibranchs are slugs, ocean slug, but they have some really cool ways to defend themselves. The one at the top is one you see on Florida beaches a lot, so I just kind of want you, oh, I know what that is. It's easy to remember because that little tiny hole looks like a place you'd put your key. So it's called a keyhole limpet. Keyhole limpet. So impress one of your friends next time you're at the beach. You go, oh, look at that, a keyhole limpet. Then you could say, see, it doesn't look like a keyhole, and then you spread knowledge. Limpets, snails, slugs, nudibranchs. I just talked about those. All right, but before we get to nudibranchs, we got to talk about some weird stuff that happens among animals. Sometimes animals do things that seem to defy reason, all right, if they have the ability to reason, which many of them don't. But what I mean defy reason, they seem to defy evolutionary reason. Like you're actually doing something bad. During evolutionary change, something is happening and you're doing something bad. Well, the thing that sometimes puzzles people about that is they forget about one of the conditions about evolution, one of the things we talked about. Evolution is compromises. So in a compromise, you don't get everything perfect. You balance. It's cost benefit. So torsion is the one I want to talk about here. Among the gastropods that are terrestrial, the snails, they do this thing called torsion. So let me go to the next slide and I'll show you what it is. Let's talk about the bad of torsion very quickly. If you look at the picture in the upper right, and you look at C, figure C especially, you're looking at a snail the way they look now. Now the green line is the digestive system, from the radula, the mouth, to the anus. Those little fluffy things that are sticking out the front, those are the gills, all right? These are organisms that have gills that have adapted themselves to live on land. That's a respiratory organ. I said gills, but and I actually wrote most efficient gills there, but I should probably go back and change that so we're make sure that we're not unclear about that. Gills are going to be in the water. I don't think snails' respiratory organs are called gills. They might be, but that's like a technicality thing. It's the respiratory organ. Does not matter. Look what the anus is doing. Look where the foul. Look, I just spoiled the word. Look where the nasty is coming out. Look where the toxic materials coming out. Look at where the waste products are coming out. Right on top of the gills, the respiratory, right on top of the mouth. You're fouling, right? You're actually dumping waste where you feed, as well as where you breathe. Now, if you breathe by basically absorbing air from the surrounding, absorbing oxygen, which even our lungs do that. You know, plugging that up is not a good thing to do, okay? What's going on here? Why would snails foul? They do, right? Look at this snail on the left. Look at the rosy wolf snail on the bottom. That's a Florida one. Big slug with a shell, right? It's a wolf snail. It eats other snails. It eats its own, cannibalistic too. All right, so if we go to evolution, boom, 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 these pictures are connected. Look at the one on the lower right. We're going to go back in time. There are some snails, yeah, I'm pretty sure there are. Oh, well, there certainly were some snails that the shell was more symmetrical. Right? See the way it is? But because it was easier to draw back into the body to make that foot come out to protect themselves from drying out or some predator messing with them. You know, if you mess with a snail, you know, they'll pull themselves in the shell. And because that was a bigger environmental pressure, because that was more important, snail shells became symmetrical. See, like that in the middle? Really hard to carry something like that. It's like carrying one 5-gallon bucket of water. right? One 5-gallon bucket of water is not real easy to carry, but it's a little easier to carry if you have 2 of them, right? Because you're balanced, right? It's all about balance here. So here's what happens with the situation. Is it more important to have a bigger shell to defend yourselves against predators and desiccation maybe? Or is it more important that you don't foul yourself? All right. Is it more important that you don't dump waste products over your respiratory organ gill-like thing, or over your mouth? Nobody would want to do that. We talked about what was the cnidarians and the platyhelminthes that metabolic waste to their mouth. All right. So that's that's okay and works for them. They can move away from that. Snails don't move real fast. So it's a compromise, isn't it? The answer is obvious. The answer that obviously the more important thing to do was to be able to withdraw into your shell. So snails begin to twist, evolutionarily speaking, the snail line began to twist their shell around so they could carry it more easily, because they needed that asymmetrical shell for very important environmental pressure. And they said, all right, so now another environmental pressure is being able to carry it. Well, is that more important than fouling? No. So now I'm going to twist it around, and I'm going to end up compromising. Nobody's perfect. Critters don't end up perfect. They just end up perfect for right now. If sometime in the future fouling becomes a problem, guess what? You won't be fouling. There'll be critters that'll be doing something else. All right, the snails without the shells. Oh, good, you got back in time. These are ocean snails. Scratch that. Ocean gastropods. These are snails without shells. Ocean gastropods. I love these things. One of the first things I saw ever scuba diving, and I was lucky when I was in the Navy, I got to learn how to scuba dive in the Philippines, was one of these, a nudibranch. The word literally means naked gills. What they mean by that is the gills. Look at that one on the right. You can see the red gills, or there's 3 of them coming out. The gills that stick out aren't covered by a shell. These are naked gilled gastropods, naked gilled slugs, all right? But I like nudibranch. That's a much better word. The shells, they did have it one time, all right? But because they decided on a different environmental trend, they lost their shells. So we're thinking shells were the original characteristic, the plesiomorph in mollusks, and then in some groups, like the slugs and the nudibranchs, they lost the shell. Now, it isn't a matter that they never had one. Losing the shell means predators. Now, desiccation is not a problem because they live in the water, so scratch that one. But losing a shell means predators. How can you protect yourself from things like that? All right, how do you defend yourself? And especially sometimes when you look at them and they're really brightly colored. That's what I love about them. The one I saw, I remember, was brilliant blue. They're purple with the little yellow thing sticking up top. There's that one in the middle it's just that long thing, the blue at the beginning and the end, and then all the gills. Some are a little less colorful, but they all have these things sticking out of them, right? And many times those things sticking out help them breed, like the one on the lower left. What's that one called? Bergia rhizodominicus. Oh, look at that one. The serrata, those little lumpy things that increase surface area, diffusion, osmosis. There you go. Some of them can be used as noses. Up in the front, those things are rhinophores. They're chemosensory. They smell. Chemicals can be smelled. Can be smelled. You can smell chemicals in the water. You can smell in the water. All right, now what's with all this dramatic coloration when you're walking around here and you ain't got no gills and you're soft-bodied? You're probably really good to eat. Now, my mother loves snails. I couldn't stand them. So I guess ocean creatures would like to eat them. Sometimes what you do is you advertise yourself. That's your defense. You advertise yourself, okay? A lot of these snails are like the poison dart frogs. That's what you see, the brilliantly colored frogs that live in South America that are red and green and blue. Man, they stand out like a sore thumb, They stand out like a sore thumb. The hornet, look at the hornet there, brightly yellow, brightly black. I mean, everybody go, oh, hornet, everybody that sees them. You're advertising, don't screw with me. Because in the case of the poison dart frog and many of the nudibranchs with their brilliant colors, they actually secrete these very distasteful chemicals. Chemicals that could kill you, chemicals that at least will make you go, bleh. All right? The case of the hornet, of course, will sting the crap out of you. You don't mess with them, you don't mess with that more than once. Everybody's been stung, and you know what that's like. The poison dart frogs, if you eat me, they secrete a chemical on their skin that can kill you. The Indians down there used to take their poison darts, the ones that blow darts, and touch the tips to these poison dart frogs because they would put on this material that was actually neurotoxic. So they shoot their prey, and their prey die from paralysis. Stop moving from paralysis. Probably die from a big old club in the head. In the case of these kinds of things, we call this apismatic, there it is in red, coloration, warning coloration. Don't mess with me. For example, in the purple cnidarian up there, or excuse me, nudibranch, I just dug on it, getting ahead of myself. That purple one at the top. The yellow things that stick up, the serrata, that increase surface area and maybe chemosensory. Also, these nudibranchs like to feed on jellyfish and cnidarians. Okay, and instead of the nematocysts stinging them and defending them, little twist of fate here with Mother Nature, those nematocysts also end up in the nudibranch, making their way to the tips of these serrata. So now when some predator swoops down on that purple and yellow thing, because you can see it a mile away, the first thing it gets is a snout full of stinging cells, right? So not only do they have their own maybe distasteful chemicals, they borrow, well, when you eat steal those from other organisms. Just amazing to me. Why do I have a butterfly on there? Well, that butterfly is the monarch butterfly. They make birds throw up when they eat. Like if your dog's ever messed with a toad, toad secretes stuff that makes it like. Bleh. It's like if you got half a brain, you won't do that again. And birds aren't stupid, okay? So if you go down and there's a monarch, and I come down on it and I grab it, oh my God, that was awful. It's like eating Brussels sprouts, okay, or lima beans, for me anyway. You remember, don't eat those again. You remember these orange things that look like that, don't eat them again. Like, don't have a picture. I need to give you one. But anyway, there's another butterfly out there called a viceroy. You can look it up on another webpage if you want. But a viceroy looks a lot like a monarch. Now, the viceroys are edible. You don't throw up from them. But guess what the viceroys have done through evolution? Whoa, how about if we look like monarchs, right? So this is so coloration. That's not warning coloration. It's warning coloration in the monarch, but in the viceroy, it's another type of coloration we talk about. So colors and tricking predators, that goes way back in these guys. These filter feeders with two shells, these bivalves and clams and scallops, and I've got a bunch of pictures on there. There's always that thing where people say, who ate the first oyster? Oysters aren't particularly pretty on the outside. There's one in the picture on the right in the middle, right? But a lot of times I tell folks, well, we began to eat things because we saw animals eat them. In many cases, if the animals are eating them, they're safe to eat, and there's something to eat. And we obviously had observed otters floating around their back with their little special rocks, very, very special about their rocks, mashing the crap out of these oysters and busting them open and eating those things. So we're mammal, or otter, mammal, probably won't kill me. Doesn't mean for sure. Probably won't kill me, and there is something to eat in this ugly-looking thing. There's a little baby otter at SeaWorld one time. This is why I said it about the rocks, and he was playing with a rock. Small little rock, right? Well, it wasn't that big. And I thought, he's playing like the dog does with the ball, right? So I went to reach for the rock to kind of just, throw it or whatever. It bit the snot out of me. And the trainer says, no. She said, that's not a play toy. She says to him, that's a possession, man. Don't screw with that. I was like, okay. Not so cute, are you? Mostly in the ocean, there are freshwater species. Everybody said, where do I get a mollusk? Paper pond shells. They're all around the lakes around here. You pick them up. They look like a bivalve. There might be one of the shells or two. They're paper pond shells. They snap in your fingers. That's how you know what they are. They're real obvious. 2 shells, so you're a bivalve. Now, here's how the shell works. Really very cool. The organism doesn't need to use any effort to keep it open. You see, at the hinge, right at the top, there's a ligament, a hinge ligament, that actually naturally causes the shell to open. So the shells are naturally want to be open. They use those 2 big muscles down there, those adductor muscles. See them down below where I've labeled that thing, adductor. There's 2 of them, one on either side. Those adductor muscles, adduction in A&P means to bring things together. When you bring your legs or you bring your arms towards the center line of your body, you're adducting. The opposite is abducting. All right, so those adductor muscles pull the shell together when predators or when the tide goes out, right? So when the tide is in and the shell or the bivalve is feeding, it doesn't need to have any effort to keep the shell open. It just relaxes its muscles. Oh. And the water moves in through the siphon, and those sticky gills absorb the food, and they pass it into the mouth. Those labial polyps there, those green things that I labeled, they secrete the mucus. Okay? So the mucus it traps the food, passes it to the mouth, goes into the anus when it's done with it. Yes, there's fouling, just like in the gastropods, but there's not a really big compromise here because these guys, when they're out, when the tide's in and they relax their shells, it's basically seawater mixing with the organisms here, right? The stuff's moving in and moving out, so you can really dilute all those waste products, and they're moving through pretty quickly. So there's not really a fouling issue here, okay? The siphons allow the food to move across the gills and be trapped, and of course then there's the excrement siphon. Now the open circulatory system part, notice the heart at the top, that little space around the heart, the opening around, that's what the coelom is. That's what the coelom was becoming in these guys. The heart is open. Notice the blood vessels, the circulatory system is. They go out on either end and then they stop. That's exactly what they do. The blood goes bloop, right out of the ends, right into that mantle cavity there, immersing the foot, the digestive gland, the stomach, the gonads, all them things, the gills, all that stuff that's lived, the adductor muscles, the kidney, all those float in hemolymph. All right, and then the blood, or the heart, as I said, has a little hole in it, an ostia, that's what it's called, and that through that hole, the blood goes back into the heart. It's kind of like putting a pump into a pool that's filled up. So the heart doesn't displace water; it just moves water. Water's just being moved around. Blood's just hemolymph. It's just being moved around. All right, just being moved around. The blood goes into the heart pumps it back into the mantle cavity. From the mantle cavity, it comes in back into that ostia, into the heart, pumping it through. You can get away with that if you live on land. Oh, I'm sorry, water. Yeah, of course. You can give, well, some critters do it on land, but you generally are going to be a low metabolic critter. You're generally going to be a cold-blooded kind of critter. I don't know of any critters that have high metabolic rates that have this open circulatory system. So again, not being better than the other, this works really well. Filter feeders, no radula. I already talked about all those other parts. All right. These really cool ones. Cephalopods, head, foot. Okay, these are the squid, the octopus, and something called a chambered nautilus. None of these in fresh water. None of these on land. They all live in the ocean. Now, these are pretty big mollusks. Probably the most intelligent of all the invertebrates out there, by the way. So they have a closed circulatory system. So they have a more efficient circulatory system. So you see, in this particular case, there's kind of a little bit of an offshoot. That would be an example of convergent evolution. See, we see closed circulatory systems when we get into larger, more extensive creatures. And these guys can get pretty big. Some cases they can get up to 60 feet, right? You didn't see one of those. Now, they don't get big enough to attack sailors on a ship, but they do get pretty good size. Those are all sea stories, right? Things that you tell people to impress them in a bar after you get away from being out at sea. All right, so foot, arms, tentacles, what's it all about? Well, a foot was what it was. The arms and the tentacles are what it became. There is a technical difference. Only squid have tentacles. Octopus have 8 arms. Squid have 8 arms, but they also have 2 tentacles. Tentacles are those only with suckers at the end. So you can have a sucker at all the way down the length, or you can have a sucker just at the end. They're used for different purposes. In many cases, the squids use their tentacles, for passing sperm to one another, male to female. The male will take the tentacle and insert it into the mantle cavity of the female. This is their mantle cavity. It's that part inside of this part of them. In the octopus, it would be up in here, and deliver sperm. Here, honey. Now you can have suction hooks, so like an octopus. Squid take it to the next level. They actually have hooks in some of the species on the suction. So you get a suction and a hook part. Now, That really is going to capture their prey. That's what they're trying to do, right? It's like trying to get away from a bunch of I hate those things. Bougainvilleas with the spines all in them, and you're all caught up and any of that sort of stuff. You can imagine. And again, beaks. That's what they did with that radula. They turned it into a beak. Some of them with toxic saliva that would kill you, very dead, very quick if you got bit by one. As I said, these things have closed circulatory systems, so they get to be a pretty good size. Okay, anytime this slide wants to change. There we go. Oops. Of course. Oh, that is the next slide. Doggone it. There we go. All right. The mantle cavity, these are propulsion. That's how they move around. They use a siphon at the end of the mantle cavity. So they suck water up in the mantle cavity, the place that all the water is circulating around in the bivalve. Remember, they have a closed circulatory system, so their mantle cavity is not full of hemolymph, so they just suck water up in there and they spit it out, and that's how they move. Or they're able to produce ink and use that to get away from predators, like that diver that's in the film or in the picture there. What they do with that shell? Well, they don't have a shell. Most of them. The chambered nautilus, this weird thing at the bottom does. I have a chambered nautilus and shell in class. I'll show you how they use it for buoyancy. But the shell in other cephalopods has become what we call a pen, an internal part, just a small. Like I said, they didn't really rely on the shell so much for the environment, and they certainly didn't really need it for predators. They usually were. But they did have it back in evolutionary time. That's what I'm saying. There is proof. Ammonites, right there, those two guys that are holding up an ammonite is an ancient cephalopod. It's an ancestor of squid and octopus, so it definitely had a shell. It's a big boy, too. One of the things, too, if they do need to protect, also for communication, these are really smart critters. I always thought if I studied invertebrates, it would be these. They can flash colors at each other. They can use chromatophores or special cells. They can flash a camouflage to help them hide. They can communicate. The chambered nautilus will get together like during sexual thing and back and forth at each other. I don't know what they're saying. They can use it for. They can use bioluminescence, so bacteria in their tissues that'll glow, or they can reduce the light themselves at depth to confuse predators. So this one looks like a squid, but they can actually change the lighting so they look like nothing. Like I said, they're smart critters. Those are cuttlefish in the picture down below. Smart critters, very highly developed nervous system. I've actually had them check me out on dives before when I've been scuba diving, like actually come up and act like they're curious about me. As I said, they get to be pretty good size. We were aware of these big squid. It wasn't like, oh my goodness, these things exist. They washed up on the beach dead, so we knew they were around. We just had not seen one alive yet. We were also aware of them because we knew that sperm whales like to eat them. They would swim down the depths and find them. And, of course, the squid didn't go peacefully. And the reason why we knew the squid ate them is dead squid would have beaks. Beaks preserve very well. A buddy of mine actually was doing dolphin elite squid, smaller squid. And he was actually identifying which ones they were eating by the beaks. But we knew by the beaks and also by sucker scars. That's what that picture is up there. It says up to 5 centimeters. That's talking about that's left behind from the hooks that these guys had on their tentacles. And their arms, obviously. So it's 5 centimeters across in diameter. So we knew there were big suckers down there, right? They would leave these scars on the sperm whales. We would see them. It wasn't until lately a Japanese firm got to film one alive. They used bait. Obviously, it looks like some other arthropod or other cephalopod, and got a good picture of the big boy there. 30 feet, 40 feet, something like that. So the big ones are down there. Smart too, like I said. These are very smart critters. They're very good at performing tasks of cognition. Like, can you figure it out? Problem solving. Give them the jars with prey inside to learn how to take the jar lids off. Pretty doggone quick, actually. Watch them on YouTube. There's tons of it out there. So they're really smart. There's reports of divers that take divers down onto a websites. What am I thinking about? Lead dives or are frequent visitors to a place underwater where there's an octopus. The octopus will develop a friendship with the diver, like a pet. Comes up. They're very tactile stimulated, like to be touched. So they're swimming all over the guy. Oh, you're here. It's like a dog, right? And oh, thank you, whatever. I don't know if he named it. Probably had to name it. See the siphon on that one? It's huge. Must have named it, and then would go back and didn't mess with him and just wanted to, hey, how you doing today? And it'd be him up for like years. It's amazing. All right, we do need to move on. I do want to get through the segmented worms today, so I want to finish off by saying out there among the extinct species, unfortunately, mollusks, because of their habitat for the most part, is being severely destroyed, or the populations are being severely destroyed. So we're losing a lot of the mollusks, mostly the freshwater ones, because they're closer to humans and more stuff and pollutants get into the water that way, unfortunately, of all the groups. So it is these guys that take it on the nose the most for our advanced population size. Segmented worms, the annelids, the ones that share the trochophore larvae with the mollusks, so they're related, right? Annelids are segmented worms. They live all over the place. They get big, like the one in the picture. These are earthworms. That's the biggest earthworm, by the way. You could catch a pretty good-sized fish with that sucker, I'm thinking. All right, they do have a body plan. That's part of the segmentation. Doesn't mean you have to be segmented and have a body plan. But if you're not, then you might be like the mollusk, where it's a body lump. A little more planning going on here. You got a head, for example, where there's a collection of nervous tissue, what we call a cerebral ganglion, like we called it in the flatworm. So you're getting the sense organs up front. You're getting the things like the tentacles and that clamworm down below. You're getting the palp, so you can sense your environment. You got a prostomium, which is a segment that is involved in food collection. You have other segments that are involved in food processing. You got segments that are involved in getting rid of waste product. You got segments that specialize. You got repeatability in segments. See the picture in the upper right? That's an earthworm open up. The little white threads are the excretory system. They're kidneys. They have a kidney in every segment. If one of the kidneys craps out, it doesn't matter. You got a spare. You got several around that can take it up. I mean, there's a limit, of course, but that's one of the beauties of being segmented. You can repeat parts. Some of these guys can see. The earthworms can't. They're burrowers, so they don't need eyes. The eyes are expensive. Why have eyes if you can't see? Okay. Big thing about, again, these guys, like I said, is segmentation, although they're not all segmented. So Mother Nature always like to throw us a little curveball in there. Let's look at segmented. For one thing you can do in segmentation is you can specialize, like I said, the digestive system, right? You can make the mouth. I'm looking in the lower right now, and I've kind of just highlighted a few of the areas in red. The subpharyngeal ganglion, there's the brain. But anyway, up in the front here, you can have the mouth. You can have the brain, which is a good place to put it because that's the first part in the environment that you get to. The pharynx, which starts to masticate the food. The esophagus, which begins to move the food into the crop, which continues to the intestines, right? See what I mean? It's a conveyor belt. You become efficient. Segmentation allows you to do that. Each segment's a little bit different. In addition to repeatability, like among hearts, look at all the hearts they got in red. All those are hearts, several hearts. They're just pumping vessels is what they are. They work, though. So in every segment, now I'm in the lower left, you got a kidney, right? That part in the red and the yellow is a kidney. Every segment's got it, so you got redundancy. The segments also allow you to move. Hydrostatic skeleton, right? The water being held over the garden hose. You can move fluid through the segment. The thing can move along. Not fast, but it works. If you throw in some muscles, which they do, they have longitudinal muscles. You can alternate muscle contractions. You can wiggle and move. You got circular muscles, too. You can grow a little bit larger, a little bit smaller. All that together, you can move fairly well for a thing that ain't got legs. Now, you don't have legs, but you do get traction, especially if you're an earthworm. And the other group we're going to talk about, they have these things called setae. You know them from feeling an earthworm that it's rough. You run your fingers down an earthworm, it feels rough. Now, setae, several spellings, setae, chetae, all made of chitin, which is that hard exoskeleton from arthropods. There's that connection again. That's all about organisms, being related to one another, and us for that reason. All right. So and fungus. The setae, you can see it in the picture here. The little rustly hairs, kind of like a 5 o'clock shadow running down. This organism is a burrower. So living underground, no eyes, don't need any eyes. You do need traction. So as you're making your way, locomoting hydrostatic skeleton through the dirt, you're grabbing with your kiti, your setae. These things of chitin. That's where the rough thing comes from. A little bigger, a little more complicated. So we're going to close the circulatory system. No respiratory system, though. Good, because you're small, you can get away with that. You can get away with not having a respiratory system when you're small, just like the mosses do, because things can diffuse. It's not going to work when you get bigger. Dorsal blood vessels, blood vessel with a bunch of hearts, and they're called circulatory system vessels here, and a ventral nerve cord. The reason why I put those in red is because later on we're going to talk about where the vertebrate line came from when we get out of the invertebrates, and that's an important clue right there. And I'll come back to that. Hopefully I'll remember to do that. I'll do it right now. We're opposite, okay? Your heart is ventral to your nerve cord. So you have a ventral heart, ventral blood vessel, and you have a dorsal nerve cord. All right, so anyway, I'll talk more about that later. The smooth part, when you run your fingers down, this is called the clitellum, which secretes the mucus for the eggs. These are eggs. Look like little corn kernels before they're popped, don't they? They have a nephrostome, a really cool kidney system that you see there. One in each segment. Repeatability. Works like the flame cells, by the way. Works by using these cells that gather fluid from the segments and surrounding segments, if need be, and works it through until it extracts the material that it wants to, the waste product, dumps it out through an external opening. One in every segment. So again, the flame cell thing kind of just, added to it. Actually, the nephrostome is part of that whole system together, which we call a metanephridium. So this is a larger kidney structure, metanephridium, one in every section. Very similar to the molluscan system you find in this system as well. All right, more about them being related to one another. All right, two different groups of clades of annelids. There are those that move around, right? Those that are errantia. Errant is to travel. If you're erratic, you might be erratic, moving around. Nearly all of these are marine. This is the group you probably don't know quite as well, except for the fact that, you actually may have encountered these, especially if you've been at the beach. Most of these are all in the marine. There's only a few freshwater, no terrestrials. What they've done, Errantia, the traveling ones, the ones that are really good at traveling, being that they live in the ocean, being that they're marine, many species have added to the setae. The setae have become more a matter of getting traction because these do live in the ocean, but oftentimes in the substrate, right, in the sand. And then they have parapodia, which are feet-like things. Parapodia is foot-like, okay, that they can use to swim when they need to, all right, also help to get down in the sand, and this is the wonderful thing about evolution, they can do gas exchange through them. They're thin enough that they can do the diffusion and osmosis thing. And a lot of surface area there. See the one in the lower left? Look at all the parapodia. Tons of them. So no doubt many of these can move around. Not every one of them. Some are planktonic. Some are predators. Some are grazers. I looked up a bunch of them because I was like, what the hell is a sea mouse? There's a sea mice in the right. I guess because it's kind of hairy looking. That's why slug worms, tube worms, scale worms, all of these very obviously segmented, very big parapodia segmented worms are Errantia. Travelers, okay? These are Errantia. So are these deep sea rift worms that you see here in the picture, where the adults of these organisms actually have no gut. They have a symbiotic relationship, a sulfur oxidizing bacteria. Remember back in the prokaryotes, there were some bacteria that could live off sulfur, and these guys live around those geothermal vents. It's cool because we didn't even know these things existed until early 70s, 72, 73. All right, that's another group of Errantia. Now, there are those that move around a lot, or can move around a lot, and those that move rather slowly or maybe not at all, right? These would be the Sedentaria, the other group. And the first group we'll talk about in the Sedentaria, those that are really very sedentary, those are because they can. These are the leeches, all right? Like that medicinal leech that you see there, or the one stuck to the guy's thumb, or the one that you see in the grass there. These are all leeches. These are parasites, right? These are external parasites, mostly freshwater. Luckily, I guess for them, they can swim. They're able to cross-fertilize each other, right? They're hermaphroditic, so they both have male and female sex organs, but just like earthworms that you'll see in the next picture, what they do to shuffle it up is they'll fertilize each other's opposite. So the testes of one will fertilize the ovaries of another, and vice versa. It mixes it all up, right? They don't have a clitellum, that mucus part, the part that secretes the mucus, unless they're breeding. Now, they look segmented on the outside, but here's the exception among segmented worms. They're not segmented internally, okay? The suckers and all that have to do with being a parasite. You don't need chaetae. You don't need setae if you're a parasite, remember? If you're sedentaria, those setae and chaetae are actually a waste of time to produce because you're a parasite. You get around by sticking on each other, by sticking on a host. Not everybody is a hematophage. Cool word, right? A bloodsucker. Mosquitoes that fit in this group. Some are detritivores. They eat the decaying gunk in the bottom of a lake. So not every one of them is a parasite. Unlike earthworms, these guys, though, cannot regenerate. Earthworms can often regenerate body parts. These guys can't do that. All right, so there are those that move very little, if at all, and there are those that move relatively slowly. If you've ever helped one off of a sidewalk after a rainstorm, poor guys, I'm like, oh, he's never going to make the 2 inches to the grass before he dries out. These are the earthworms. Now, up above is an example of what I mean by cross-fertilization. And then there's a picture down below to show you what's happening, right? So they're fertilizing each other. Variability, right? No head on these guys. We did have a head or a prostomium on the multi-parapodiid one. No parapodia. A few chaetae, like in the picture I show you, because they're burrowers for the most part. And these can regenerate from either end. Cutting off the end, it'll grow the other segments to fill in the end. Don't really have a brain. They got cerebral ganglion, so they can just kind of amass a brain tissue again at the posterior segment. Remember the idea of redundancy in the segments? There's some other segmented worms. There's a nice up-close picture of chaetae, too, in the lower right. That's what they look like, made out of chitin. Very important in the agriculture industry, by the way. Darwin wrote a whole bunch of books about a whole book about earthworms and how important they were to agriculturists. Without earthworms chewing up the soil, that's what you see in the left in the picture. That's a worm casting. You can buy those. Those are very good for agriculture. They're have a lot of nutrients because, of course, what the worms do is they process the food in their mouth, take out the nutrients, extract it or extract the nutrients they need, dump the waste material, which is one man's poison, another man's food, which might be a more broken down version of a food that a plant needs, etc. So they're good for the agriculture. 1 acre of waste farmland has 50,000 earthworms producing something like 18,000 tons of castings a year. So that's why he was able to get a whole book out of it. You got a whole book on earthworms? Yeah, because doggone things are pretty doggone important. Wonderful. I'm making good time here. Any questions? I know I'm kind of blazing through their mollusks. It's a really interesting group, no doubt. Where are we? Oh, good. All right, so now we got the next group. One group we already talked about, so we don't have to go over them, but this is the shedding group, right? These are the shedders. Remember the nematode we did in lab, or the roundworm we did in lab, this is the repeat of the lecture, was, come on. There we go. Had a cuticle on it, right? You had to actually take the, if you remember, if you could feel it with the scalpel, if you're careful, it kind of has to punch through something. It's got a cuticle. It's got something it's got to get rid of. It's got an exoskeleton. That's how it grows. Same thing as the arthropods, and that's why we put them together in the group, right? Just like we put the mollusks and the annelids and those organisms together, we put them together because they're similar to one another, right? This has to do with the larvae that they have with the mollusks and the annelids. With the nematodes, it's the shedding part in the arthropods. Does that mean that really is a true taxonomic characteristic? No, at this point it is, so someone shows otherwise, right? It's a process of science. So we're not going to go through the nematodes. We did that in lab, right? Really cool, but not much to them. Very simple. That was the point of my lab. If you're thinking, what was I supposed to get out of that? That this is a tube within a tube body plan? That you can do that, for example, in the case of Ascaris, if you're a parasite, that life can get by with just accomplishing a few very simple things. You don't have to be complex. And you can be very successful, folks. Nematodes have been along for a long time. No, they're everywhere. They'll be around a long time. Oh, wonderful. One of my favorite. No, yeah, one of my favorite. If nothing else, the arthropods. Arthro, the moving appendage group. That's what we're talking about. Everybody in this group's got moving appendages. It's all about the moving appendages. Very successful. Man, they kicked ass when it comes to living on Earth. Even today, right now, as we speak today, right now, there are alive 10 to the 18 living arthropods. I think that's 100 billion, 100 billions. I think, I'm trying to remember the other day, I think that is the number of stars in all the galaxies in the universe. Well, it's a heck of it. It's 1 followed by 18 zeros. Big number, right? At any one time, that's how many living are. That's not how many species there are. There's well over a million species. But at any one time, that's how many are alive. Most of them here in Florida. Most of them when I want to go out in the woods. I don't know. I think I've gotten immune to mosquitoes after a while. I come back and have bites all over me and never remember them biting me. Million species, about 2/3 of the animal species, very, very, yay, get my hand, very successful, right? Insects are the biggest one of the group. They're everywhere. Many different kinds of insects. There are the flies, the butterflies, the moths, the bees, the wasps, the beetles. Not the group, actually the organisms. The other insects, the smaller groups are the things we call the crustaceans, the shrimp, lobsters, crabs, the arachnids. If you're arachnophobic, you don't like spiders, you might not like mites and ticks and scorpions either. They're arachnids. And then another group of arthropods, that's going to be the millipedes and the centipedes. Biggest group is the beetles, though. Biggest group is the insects. Among that is the millipedes. There's a neat picture on the right that I found online. I think that's kind of cool. Showing the different groups, the different kinds of organisms there are. They're everywhere. That's what ubiquitous means. They are everywhere. What's the big thing about these guys? Well, it is the jointed appendages. That is one big thing. But along with the jointed appendages is what they did with this other characteristic that we've talked about. They went crazy with the Hox genes, man. They went crazy when it came to changing the sequence. They went crazy with flipping with all those different switches where they could mess with the segmentation. So in an earlier picture, I showed you a little hallucigenia. What a cool name in the fossil record. This is something that lived way back, during the Cambrian explosion, or right after when was it? Right after the Cambrian explosion, sometime around that, long time ago. It took segmentation and went very literal. Just repeated the segments, which has worked in some groups, hasn't it? More or less, kind of like with the earthworms. They're segmented, even though they're specialized inside. Trilobites in the middle there, those are trilobites. Those aren't around today. They were around the Cambrian explosion, but they were segmented. But notice they even started to do what the hallucinogenia didn't do, right? Started to modify. The segments in the front are kind of like the head segments, narrow back in the tail. Okay, cool. If you took the segments and started to fuse them, you can make bigger, stronger segments, like maybe like that Florida spiny lobster has done with its head and thorax segment. Thorax is your chest. It's made of an H in there. Cephalothorax. You can fuse segments. All right. Now, what can you do with all these segments? Well, it's kind of like all them switches again. You can specialize them. You can make segments in the front that are that are useful for gathering information about your environment. Okay, and then you can take and put an appendage on segments, and you can diversify those. So, for example, in the front ones, you could put an appendage, a jointed appendage, by the way, of say something like an antenna, like you have on the lobster, right? Chemosensory, smelling the environment. Then a little bit later back around the mouth, we're going to look at in the crawfish, around the mouth, all them little things that if you ever watched a video of them eating something, they're going crazy with something or other. Those are all appendages that have been modified for feeding. Then a little bit later back, you got walking legs. A little later back, you got swimming appendages. All of that has to do with the segmentation. So I guess I would say the big thing about arthropods, if someone was to say, name two big things about them, diverse segments, diverse segmentation. That's the big thing. That is the thing about arthropods, and it's all because of those Hox genes that we talked about, where you can just, it's like, man, after the Cambrian explosion, critters went crazy. They tried all kinds of things. Most of it failed. Luckily, a lot of it survived, so we can just go, whoa, how cool. All right, segmentation I already talked about. Remember, though, not monophyletic. Lots of things are segmented, including earthworms. It doesn't mean that arthropods are closely related. It was just, or us, we're segmented. It just means, man, this stuff works. So a lot of critters came up with the same idea. It is important. If you fuse the segments, we call it a tagmata. So when I said cephalothorax, I was actually talking about a tagmata. And a tagmata is just a super segment. The sensory collecting, food gathering, processing segment. Okay? Stomach, mouth, all that stuff. So you make what we call a morphologically functional unit. That's what a tagmata is, right? Just a super segment. Just take little segments through evolution, fuse them together, and you get a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, or maybe you get a cephalothorax, or maybe in spiders what you get is something, just different words, a prosoma and an opistosoma. What I like about those words is pro means in front, opisto means behind. So you get the segment in the front, you get the segment in the behind. Arthropods also have an exoskeleton. Why is that so good? You learned about that in Bio 1. It's made of chitin and protein. It's tough. It's tough. It allows to get on land. It allows to protect you against desiccation. It allows you to protect against predation. It allows you to survive in a drier climate. Okay? Of course, if you got to get bigger, the problem is you got to molt. If you grow bigger, if you undergo the need for a bigger exoskeleton, you have to undergo ecdysis. You have to shell. But as I said, another big thing about these guys, in addition to what did I say already, segmentation and diverse, appendages, jointed appendages, right? You can move with them. See that little picture, how cool, little muscles there? Muscles always contract. They never expand, so they always contract. So you contract that red muscle and it flexes, it's extended, then you contract the blue one when you want to bring the leg back in. Move around with them. You can extend and retract them. You got legs. You can walk. You can modify them. You get antenna, mouth parts. Wings shouldn't be in there. Sorry, wings. That's wrong. I did a little further research and found out wings aren't modified appendages. But you can add wings to the segments anyway. So you can do things, man. I'm telling you. Big thing about arthropods too is the fact that they, surprisingly, living on land, they go with an open circulatory system. Has a lot to do with that exoskeleton. That exoskeleton is really good at keeping them away from the nasties out there in the environment. See how these guys are that's a gravid lobster. Those are eggs. See what you can do with appendages? The swimming legs on a female, she can store her eggs on them. That'd be illegal to possess, by the way. In red, I've listed some of it. You got reproduction with those segments, moving, feeding, defense, sensing. See what you're doing? You're diversifying. Now, I know I'm right at the time, but I do have one more slide about their sensory organs because this is exciting as well. They can't see the way we see. They actually have a compound eye. You see in the lower right, a compound eye is made up of ommatidium, which has a lens, and then a cone, which is like the condenser in a microscope. It focuses the light. And then the rhabdom is like a fiber optic cable. Like, cool. The light goes down the rhabdom, goes in the retinular cells where it's segmented. But there's a bunch of these in the eye. That's why the picture's up above. A little bigger picture, you see like a fly's eye is a bunch of these little segments. All right, so they don't see the world the way we do. Like if Charles Darwin, a picture of Charles Darwin, they would see it in the picture you see down below. Really good for motion, not so good for detail, though, which is important because a lot of these are predatory insects. So they're really good at seeing stuff move across their eye. Some of them have another type of light-sensing organ called an ocelli. Ocelli, it just basically tells light and dark. Right, some have both, like you see down below. This one actually has its ocelli in a triangle. Ocellular triangle is good because it helps really pinpoint where the light is coming from. Some can also hear. For example, they have a thing called a tympanum. It's just a membrane stretched over a tube, basically. It's basically their eardrum, and they can hear fairly well. Not the way we hear, but they can hear well enough to be able to communicate with one another, for example. Spiracles, we'll talk about when we get back together, are holes in the side. Spiracles are how these organisms breathe, in many cases, living on land. All right, so I'm at the limit here today, Marie. Thank you. I appreciate it, but that's all I got today for lecture. Let me stop the recording.